Welcome to...
Wow.
No?
Oh.
Hi, welcome to the latest webinar on today's International Imposter Syndrome Awareness Day, where I'm joined by my fellow co-founders, Lisa Ventura and Nathaniel Schooler, as we talk about defeating doubt and fear and breaking free from imposter syndrome. And I know when I first was understanding what imposter syndrome was, I didn't think breaking free was ever going to be possible. But there is that huge piece around recognizing what it is that's driving us into that. And then once we understand it, the only thing that is greater than fear is hope. So when we can start to reframe that thinking into what it is we do want to think about versus what it is we don't want to think about, we really do take that first step into defeating that doubt and breaking through, because things are only scary until you start them. When you look back, it's amazing how much more sense life makes in the rearview mirror. Nathaniel, what about you?
Absolutely. That's a really good way of explaining it, actually, because it is what we focus on expands, right? So, you know, it's like the other day, I hadn't done this live video like on my own, like for ages, and I had fear, right? I was like, oh, what if I look like an idiot? What if I can't remember what to say, or, you know, I get this wrong. And then I remembered that I'd like done it before, right? And for that split second, it got easier because I was like, well, I'm just going to do it. Like, I'm just literally just going to do it and prepare as much as I can and I have time for, but I'm just going to get on with it. And just getting on with it, like the power of taking action is actually so amazing. Like it really made a big difference, you know, for me the other day. It was just because it's like, if you've done something before, then you can do it again, right? Like that was kind of how I framed it in my mind, despite the fact that I was nervous as hell. You know, going live is always like that, really. So, but yeah, so that's...
It's you know, one thing I always ask myself, which might be a bit of a harsh question, is what's the worst that can happen, and can I live with that? And as long as the answer is yes, then it's got to be worth the leap, hasn't it? Okay, as well, yeah, if you can live with the worst that can happen, then maybe, you know, maybe it's okay. But Lisa, we were just chatting about you kind of having to reframe that thinking, so that when we're fearful of something, what we do is we focus in, don't we, on the thing that we don't want, and then all of a sudden that fills all of the space, all of the available thinking. And yet if we can focus instead on what we do want, then actually very often that's what starts to come into play. Is that something that you've seen when you've been going through your breakthrough?
Absolutely. And I have a phrase, fortune favours the bold, and I resonated a lot with what Nat was saying about when he was going live with this video, when I'm trying to think about doing things, you know, like that. And I'm trying to sort of think of that phrase, you know, what's the worst that could happen? So I'll go live and I might say, you know, the wrong word or the wrong thing or make a mistake or so on. You know, it doesn't matter. Move on and, you know, do better the next time and so on. And just trying to reframe that thinking. And I'm also a huge, you know, I tend to think of the worst case scenario all the time and, you know, the biggest catastrophe that could happen. So I'm still on today. Everything's all on. I've got laptop set up, everything ready to go. So if this breaks down or goes down, whatever, I've got a backup to, you know, get online via 4G and stuff like that. I've got a gazillion things around me to try to compensate for everything that might possibly, you know, go wrong. And I'm trying to get out of that thinking as well.
And some of it's finding those steps that work for you, isn't it?
Yeah.
Long term, I don't want these to be the steps that I have to go through, but they might be the steps that I need to go through today. And I think it's just taking that step back. I know when I did my TEDx last year, and that really was on kind of like breakthrough belief. And yet, despite the fact that I talk a lot, as you guys know all of the time, but I actually talk for a living quite a lot as well. That was the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. And I remember having to stand there and I believed in what I was talking about. I believed what I was going to say. I know the power of belief. And yet, as I did my first rehearsal, we were stood in a room with 15 other speakers. So they were all in the same position. We'd become a real group, a real community that was supporting each other. So I knew I was in a safe space. And I had to go first. I think I was like, get it over and done with. Let's just move it through. I managed my 13-minute speech in 8 minutes. I didn't miss any of it. I just talked that fast that people probably had no idea what it was I was talking about. And the feedback was from here up. They said you looked super confident, you looked like you were comfortable, knew what you were doing. But from there down, they said, we don't actually know how you managed it. Your whole body was literally shaking, like visibly shaking. We didn't understand how you were actually still stood upright. And we couldn't understand how this bit was so calm. It hadn't gone red or anything. But this bottom bit, you were like, oh my goodness, she's going to collapse. And I realized that's something I learned having dealt with imposter syndrome for so many years, was to kind of outwardly up top look like you were in control. No matter how out of control you were, you could put out that belief that actually you're in control, really. And it really brought home to me, and in a very physical way, just what it had been like for all of those years to have that crippling doubt, that constant fear that you'd be found out, that you weren't worthy, that this would get taken away, that you, whatever it was that was driving that particular piece. And as I said in that speech, the thing that I've learned with all this study is that the only thing greater than fear is hope. And the other thing that we know is that our subconscious brain, whilst it is the happiest helper we're ever going to have, it's got one very, very significant flaw. And that is that it doesn't understand help or harm. So whatever you tell it, it thinks is important. So if you tell it you're rubbish at something, it will run off into the library of your brain and it'll find all the times you got it wrong and lay them out for you. Here you go. And you got it wrong here and here and here and here, until you go, oh my God, I knew I shouldn't have done this. I knew that I wasn't ready for it. But we also know that if we focus on things we want, it will go and find us those. Yeah, as I've shared many times, if you think about when you've gone to buy a car, and you've finally worked out what car you want, you know, the colour, you know, the make, you know, the model. And all of a sudden, all you see is that car. It's everywhere. And it's not because there's more of those cars around. It's because your subconscious brain knows it's important to you. So whereas before it was filtering those cars out as being just background noise, it filters them into view. And that's how our brains work when it comes to breaking free of doubt and fear. The more we focus on the thing that we're fearful of, on the thing that we're doubting, the more likely it is that it will happen, because our subconscious brain does everything it can to make it happen because it doesn't understand that help and harm. So one of the biggest lessons that I learned and have helped people with since is, whatever it is we're thinking, ask ourselves, is that what I actually want? And if it's not what you want, ask yourself, what do you want, and focus on that instead. Because if we focus on that, so if we say, well, at the moment I don't feel very confident, I worry that it's all going to go wrong. That's not how I want to feel. I want to feel super confident and that it will go well as long as I try my hardest. So if I focus on on what that's going to look like and feel like and sound like, and the more you can kind of expand that vision of what it is you're trying to achieve, the easier it is for you to achieve that, because you're now connecting all of your senses and really allowing your subconscious brain to think of different ways to actually find ways to make it happen. A little bit like, have you ever driven home and you do the last bit and you get onto your drive and you think, I don't really remember the last 2 minutes. Clearly you were driving and you were conscious, but our subconscious brain kicks in at points and takes over when our thinking brain is distracted doing something else. So I think for me, one of the biggest lessons that I learned when we think about how we do defeat doubt and fear is to write down what I want instead of what I don't want. I spent so much of my life running away from what I didn't want rather than running towards what I do. And there's a real distinct difference between the two. Very often we're all moving away from what we don't want. We haven't given real thought and clarity to what actually is it that we do want, and therefore how do we make those steps forward. And so we seemingly repeat the same problems because we've not really thought about our destination.
Wow, Well, I'd like to just say, when you did your talk, I was super proud of you, and when I watched it, because I knew you were going to do one, and I was like, and I was thinking, I wonder what she's doing when she's preparing. So when you stood up and you're above here, you were fine, you were smiley, and you were Kim, and you weren't red. But what was the rest of you like? Was it tense? Were you like tensing your hands? What was it like? You don't remember? Or?
I do. It was a really weird experience in that all day, because I was on in the afternoon, so all day, and everyone was laughing at me afterwards. They were like, "You were the most supportive person. You were going, you've got this. You know what you're doing, etc., etc." When it came to me waiting for my bit, they mic'd me up, and I was stood at the back. Instead of having the same nice pep talk to myself as I'd given to everybody else, I literally looked at myself in the reflection of the glass and went, just get over yourself. It's 12 minutes of your life and you're not going to die. Just grow up. Thought afterwards, interesting that even though you've made these big shifts in kind of being kind to yourself, in those moments, you still will go into critical best friend to just get you over. And then I'll be honest, I actually had to listen to it back to find out what I said, because I remember going on. I remember seeing this sea of faces that we've been told you can't see anybody. So that threw me. It's like, no, you're not supposed to see you. And then I remember at the end forcing myself to stay there, because when I'd done the previous rehearsal, the minute I finished, I ran off the stage. Almost. And they were like, no, you've got to stay where you are. So I remember telling myself, just count to 10 and then you can go. So I remember those bits, but I had no idea what I'd said in between. I mean, clearly I'd rehearsed, because you have to, you know, it has to, the week before, and I never knew this before doing one for myself, but the week before, there was a dress rehearsal. And if you weren't ready, if you didn't hit all the things that they needed you to hit, so there wasn't a call to action, it wasn't a new information that was going to give people a breakthrough, then despite the fact that you spent, at that point, 14 weeks doing coaching and working on this, they could say you're not allowed to go on. And even if you do go on, once you're up there and you've kind of done your talk, there's no guarantee it gets to go on the TED platform. It then has to go to them for them to confirm whether or not they agree that actually it was okay to go and do that. So I think that kind of brought some additional pressure. But I think, again, I kind of looked at it and went, what is the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that can happen is that I get up and I deliver the speech and nobody cares. And it doesn't help a single solitary person. And that would be awful. But it probably wouldn't be the end of the world. Nobody'd really mind. If it didn't, if it added no value to them, it probably isn't going to go down on the list of the worst things that have ever happened in their life, that they spent 12 minutes and didn't actually get anything from it. So I was like, well, I could live with that. I mean, I hope that people get something out of it. It was quite a personal story that I shared. And that, again, when I was thinking about it, that whole doubt and fear that you stood up there telling at the start a very personal story, which was about my start of my breakthrough in imposter syndrome and changing that belief in myself. But there was a lot of soul searching as to whether or not that was of any interest to anybody else, or whether it was just some woman sharing her own story because she wants to talk about herself. And for me, I had to share the story to make it make sense as to how I got to that piece around belief, because that's how I went on. It's how I went on that journey. And I, for people who haven't seen the TED Talk, when my little girl was 9 months old, I found a lump and didn't think I was going to survive, and realised in kind of writing her a letter that was all the stuff I wanted for her, all the stuff that I wanted to make sure that she didn't have to get into her 40s like I did and start to unlearn all the stuff that I'd learned for so many years and find a different way of being about myself. And I realised in that moment that children don't learn by what we say alone. They learn by what we say, what we do, and how we are. And so if I wanted her to be confident, if I wanted her to believe in herself, if I wanted her to not follow the cycle I had of self-doubt and of those feelings of being a fraud, then I needed to learn to not feel those about myself. And so that started me on this journey, which is, why do we do these things to ourselves? Because it kind of makes no sense, does it? If your friend was telling you they were doing this to themselves, you'd be there going, why? It's like, we could tell our friends, you're really clever, or you're really confident, or I love this about you, I love that about you. But who's doing that for us? Because we're in our own head all of the time. And the very sad reality is the only person guaranteed to be with us on the day we're born, that will still be with us on the day we die, is ourselves. That's the only guarantee in life, is that we will be the only person that is guaranteed to be with us at birth and death. And so if we think about that, why would we want that person to be our enemy? Why would we commit to spending every moment of our life with a person we don't like? So it kind of really struck me that it was like, well, I can't get rid of them. It's about like trying to outrun your shadow. That's not going to happen. It's not going to work. So what I need to do instead is find out, how can I like this person that I've got to spend the rest of my life with? Because there is no alternative. I do have to spend the rest of my life with them, however long or short that is. And so that probably also helped me go on that journey, which is, like managing any form of conflict. It's kind of, how do you start first? By finding the areas where there is agreement. So it's not like I disliked everything about myself, albeit, I'll be honest, embarrassingly, when I first started on this journey, and I was asked to come up with 3 things I liked about myself, it was the most excruciating 50 minutes of my life. Because everything that I came up with, the counsellor would be like, that's not about you. Because I'd be like, I've got great friends. Yeah, it's not about you. I've got an amazing daughter. It's not about you. I've got a great family. It's not about you. And I was like, oh my goodness. And after 50 minutes, I managed to come up with, I've got quite nice eyes. I mean, that's embarrassing, isn't it? I've got quite nice eyes 50 minutes in my 40s. So it's been a real journey to get to a place where actually I can look in the mirror and not feel that dislike. I think I'd really got myself into that place where I felt to blame for everything. And that's because we are responsible for our own happiness. But I hadn't been taking responsibility for setting healthy boundaries, for doing anything for myself. Lisa, as we talked about this morning, I took my cues from, was I doing everything to make everybody else happy? And as long as I was doing that, then I could say I was a nice person because I was being selfless. But was it really selfless, or was it really selfish? Because actually I was doing it all for them because I just wanted to demonstrate that I added some value. What I wasn't necessarily doing was helping them to do it for themselves. So I was creating a dependency that maybe in of itself was actually not in their best interest, even though at the time I genuinely thought that it was for the best. So I think it's, I think for a lot of people that I've spoken to over the years that have suffered at one time or another, I think making that change, letting go of the things that you thought defined you and allowing yourself to redefine who you are and who you want to be in the world is scary. Because even though the other stuff isn't what we want and it isn't doing us any good, at least it's ours. And I think for me, one of the biggest things to let go of was I'd spent years in corporate British life, and there were people that would walk around and I'd see them and they'd be like, I used to call, remember the Lynx advert where they sprayed him with Lynx and he turned into chocolate? So it always used to come into my head when I see these people strutting around that were like that. They were like, oh my goodness, they're like the lick me, I taste of chocolate people. And yet what they were doing and how other people viewed them were so misaligned. And I was so terrified that I would become one of those people. where I believed that I was brilliant at something and everybody else was there going, look, she's hopeless, bless her. If only she knew what the rest of us knew, we'd be okay. And so because it was my greatest fear, my almost my remedy to that was to doubt myself for everything and then go, at least I know that I don't think more of myself than I should, because I didn't think anything of myself. So I couldn't possibly have been in the camp where I thought I did more than I did, because I refused to let myself be in that space. But inadvertently, I therefore swung too far the other way, which meant I couldn't acknowledge anything. And I think another big breakthrough for me was when I realized the disservice I was doing to other people. So a great boss of mine, I've worked for him a couple of times, a guy called Paul Stobart. And I remember the first time, and he gave me an award. I'd only been with the organisation 3 months, and I got Leader of the Year. And I didn't think he really knew who I was. I didn't think he knew anything about me, and I was still in probation. It was a big role. I was head of sales for the UK at the time, and I got this Leader of the Year, and it was great. But I managed to convince myself that he didn't really know who I was, and he was probably just being kind, and he might have been trying to make a point to somebody else. I'm aware I created the story, but I'd got it down pat. And then a couple of years later, when I left, I got a phone call from somebody who said, "Oh, I've got someone who would like to have your contact details. Are you okay if I pass them on?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course, please do." And sorry, the kids have decided to come in, which is really helpful. Won't get the other half of their egg at this rate. Thank you. And he said, "You may remember the guy, his name." And I said, "Oh, okay, who is it?" He went, "Paul Stobart." Well, he fell off my chair. I was like, "Paul, what was my details? What my details for?" And then when Paul called me up, he went on to tell me 5 specific things that he remembered that I'd done when I worked there that he'd been impressed with. And I realised in that call that inadvertently I had been hugely disrespectful to him, because rather than trust that actually he was being genuine and that he was genuinely giving me the award because he felt that I believed it, my own self-doubt was so great that I basically said my opinion that I was rubbish was greater than his opinion that I was good. Well, that didn't make any sense to me. And this is a guy I aspire to be like. He's one of the best leaders I've had the privilege to work for. So I was like, his opinion is much better than my opinion. So why am I so convinced that mine is right? And I think that really took me on the next part of my breakthrough, which is I believe the greatest gift that we have in all of us is the gift of belief. And we can give people our belief until they can find their own. And the best example of this that I could share is I'm mum to, she just saw because it meandered in. I'm mum to a 7-year-old. And when she was learning to walk, I remember sitting there and thinking, do you know what? How daunting must that be? If somebody said to me tomorrow, "Kim, when you wake up, you're going to have to learn how to walk or talk or run or jump or skip," I would be overwhelmed. I think we'd all be overwhelmed. And yet at our most vulnerable, we did it. And that got me thinking. And I studied her and her little friends and everything that I could for ages. And it came down, in my opinion, to a couple of things. The first is your kids just want to be like you. If you can do it, they can do it. Even if they can't, they know that they're just going to keep following you and eventually they're going to get there. It doesn't matter how many times they fall onto their bottom. They don't quit. They don't go, "Oh, it was a bit hard, Mummy. I'm just going to sit in after the rest of my life." They keep getting up and trying again. And for anyone seen a toddler trying to walk, bless them, their little wobbly legs, and they look like a very tiny little drunk, don't they? As they're desperately trying to get hold of those muscles. But the moment that me do becomes me did is their breakthrough in life. And the third, and for me, perhaps the most important lesson when it came to what can I do as an adult for other adults, was I've yet to see a child learn to walk that doesn't have at least one adult nearby going, "Come on, You've got this. You're so close. We quite literally give them our belief until they can augment it with their own. And we do this every day as adults, but we don't do it overtly. So we no longer tell people when we ask someone to do a job, when we give somebody a new job, if they bring them into a company, or if we ask somebody to pick up a project for us, we do it because we believe they are going to be successful. Because if we didn't believe they were going to be successful, not only would they look stupid, we'd look stupid because we were the ones that gave them the opportunity. And human beings don't want to look stupid. But the thing is, what we don't do is take the next step. We don't say, Lisa, I would love if you would come and do this project of running International Imposter Syndrome Awareness Day. And the reason that I would love for you to do this is I know you are the most equipped person for this. You've got great organizational skills. You're fabulous with people. You always make sure you've got a contingency. So I know that those are the skills that are going to set you up for success and allow you to flourish. Instead, what we do is, hey, Lisa, why don't you just pick this project up for me? You see the difference between the two? If you were feeling a moment of self-doubt, the fact that I was able to specifically tell you what skills you were bringing, why it was that you were going to be successful, allows you to go, oh, okay, well, they think I've got those bits. They've seen something in me. Where have they seen that from? We can ask better questions. And bearing in mind, we know that 70% of people suffer imposter syndrome at any point. Then actually you could just be doing that on the day that person really needs to borrow belief. So the one thing that I encourage people to do is the next time you have an opportunity to share your belief in somebody, take it, share that belief, give them that leg up, because it might be the difference that they need in that day.
That's just wonderful. I like that a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. That's super. And thank you, Lisa. I thoroughly enjoy working with you both. And if I could have actually told Lisa that in the way that you just did, I would have done. But I said, Lisa, you're really good at this.
But that's so true, because we've lost the art of giving good feedback, and particularly as British people. So we don't tell people when they've done something good. We don't tell them what it was that's good. Specifically, we go, great job. Brilliant at feedback. See that? Said great job to everybody. I can trot off on my day. If they did something wrong, we can give them feedback then. We'll tell them where they were, what they were doing, what actions they did, what the result of those actions were. So we put that into balance. When I get feedback, I either get good job and nothing else, or I get war and peace on how I made somebody else feel and the impact that I had. And then we wonder why people don't like feedback. It doesn't feel like a gift that you want to give. I often joke with people that feedback it doesn't come with a gift receipt. You can't give it back. You can't just go, I don't like that, it's yours. I said, but if we got better at telling people what they did well in the same way. So there's a model that is used all the time when we're giving feedback that's possibly more constructive, which is you tell people the situation. You talk about the task that they were asking them to do. Then you talk about the actions that they took and then the result of those actions. If we started to do that every time we were paying somebody a compliment, we'd suddenly get a much bigger shift in positivity, because we're giving people as much time and effort and information on what we do want them to do as we are on what we don't want them to do. And I wonder if the fact that we are so poor at feedback very often is what also doesn't help people when they're suffering from things like this, because if something goes wrong, you get a lot of information, but when something goes right, it's almost it almost becomes, I think I've talked about this before, it's the kind of like it's the thrift shop brush off. We get so bad at getting any feedback that if anybody says anything nice to us, we'll say something like, oh, you look lovely today. Go, oh, this was just a £5 from Primark. It's like you can't accept the positiveness. And I think for me, that's what we've got to all try and work on, is how do we accept that positivity when people are telling us we've done something well, and not feel that's going to make us egotistical? We can just go, thanks, I'm glad it made a difference. Thank you, full stop. And for months, and I still sometimes do it now, the rest of the dialogue carries on in my head. So I might say thank you, full stop, and then in my head go, it was just a £5 from Primark, because I still can't always get myself totally over that hill. But just making those steps allows us to just start to recognize that doubt and fear, everything that we've ever achieved was once something we were fearful of. And all of us have so far survived 100% of the challenges life's thrown at us. That's a pretty good batting average. So why would we choose to doubt our ability to get through the next challenge?
That's very profound. I like the 100% of challenges that we're still alive, right? So we've obviously made it through, and we're still here. So it's like, it's good, 100%, right? And however we made it,
It's funny because at the time when you're going through something, and life often throws us all a plot twist. And when you're in it, it can feel insurmountable, and it can feel like, why me? Why is this always going wrong for me? What is it that I'm getting wrong in all of this? But when we look back, we see that actually it was there to teach us something. It was there to give us a lesson that allowed us to grow, or to meet people that we wouldn't have met otherwise, or to distance ourselves from people that probably weren't going to be healthy for us moving forward. There is always a lesson there. So I always say, if I don't feel blessed, I'll look for the lesson, because that is where the blessing will be eventually. But life does only really make sense in the rearview mirror. It's only when we look back that we can see the things that we couldn't see. And as you two both know, I love a quote. I get a quote from anywhere because I love them so much. And one of the ones that I've used a lot recently is from Frozen 2. And it says that actually you should just do the next right thing. So sometimes when we look at a problem, we look at it, we don't know how to solve the problem, but we can usually see one right thing that we could do, even if it feels really small and insignificant. I think the key for me of kind of overcoming that doubt and fear was to say, what one thing can I do? What thing is around in the direction of solving the problem that I do think I can do? I know what it is, even if I'm a bit scared about it, I know what it is and I can take that step. And before you know it, those steps have accumulated. And then you look back and realize that you've overcome whatever it was that you thought was insurmountable.
Yeah, and sometimes what is also interesting when you're trying to face up to something, that actually a lot of the time you won't even have to go through it anyway. Like if you face up to it and take some action steps towards whatever the challenge is, you'll kind of get to it and it might just disappear, or like something will just come along and just sort of move you beyond it, right? And it's just amazing. It really is amazing. Life's great like that, it really is.
Yeah, and it's because we do filter out so much of what's going on around us, because we have to. There's millions and millions and millions and millions of things going on. We'd never get anywhere if we actually absorbed them all of the time, because we'd be like, it would be like your brain on overload. So we're designed to factor things out. That's why there is a game, and it is actually called Kim's Game. I'm not making it up, but it was played a lot in the 70s. I don't know if you guys, I'm not saying you were back in the 70s, but I don't know if you ever played it. There was a tray and there was objects on it, and then everyone got a minute or two to look at the tray of objects, and then it got taken away. One thing was removed, and you had to try and work out what the one thing is. And the reason that the game works is your subconscious brain will filter out things it thinks aren't important to you. So it's a bit like if you went into any room, if we were all sat in the same room and we said, describe the room, we will all describe one thing in it, at least one thing, that the other two people didn't see. And that's because we'll have started with the things that were most interesting to us versus actually what that room looks like.
Wow. So it's a perspective thing, right? Like this imposter syndrome is how we frame it, right? I know you're big on like reframing things, and I think that's like a big takeaway from self-development, from kind of speaking with you and working with you the last few years. And it's like a lot of people will say, I've got this problem. It's like, well, it's not a problem, is it? Like, it's a challenge. Yeah. And the moment you sort of reframe these things to feel better, because they need to feel better before you can kind of step and move beyond them, right? Otherwise, you're always dreading this next challenge that comes along. It's like, but a challenge is something to make you grow, right? Like it helps you to move and grow and become a different, better person, and commit, give more value, right, to the world,
I think for me, I often use the analogy that, challenge is just opportunity in a different dress, a little bit like a squirrel is a rat with a better fur coat.
But I know, I mentioned a bit earlier about, like, I'm a bit more brutal in my attitudes when it comes to being, facing up to challenges, right? Like a lot of people, I know you were sort of saying how you have to be nice to yourself, you have to be kind to yourself and all of this sort of stuff. But I think, do you think it's like a male and female thing, whereas maybe I'm just more brutal with myself than other people are in the way that they are kind to themselves?
No, I don't think it's male or female per se. I think a lot of it is in how we position it. But I think we can sometimes have our perspective of what we think is going on in anybody else's world, and we don't know. We don't know what's going on in their world. You have no idea unless you ask, and we don't ask. We assume. So we make all of these assumptions, and that's because we talk about ourselves in facts and other people in stories. So if I was late today, I was late because I was stuck in traffic, and I couldn't get there. If you were late, it's because you're always late, because you're disrespectful and you don't like me. Chances are you're stuck in the same traffic as others. But what I've done is I've created a story because I didn't have any information in there. And therefore you go, well, I'm always really harsh on myself, but everybody else out there is just being like, being overly soft on themselves. How do you know? Have you asked that question? Have you asked what is it that they're doing and saying to themselves to allow them to take those next steps? Because again, we live in a world where perception, like possession, is 9/10 of the law. If I perceive it to be true, it's true. And therefore, if we want to change somebody's perception, we have to change what it is that we're doing or saying or being. I had somebody once that, and when I'd given them some feedback, that they were like, "Oh, your perspective's wrong." And I was like, "Okay, well that's fine, but you can't just tell me it's wrong. You're going to have to show me something that's different, because here is why I'm getting the perspective that I've got. So we can work on that together, and you can change it. But you're going to change my perspective. There's going to have to be something that changes in one of these things." And one of the main ways of changing it is talking to people, because we don't know. So how do you know that people are being really soft on themselves? If people really were being as soft on themselves as we say that they are, we wouldn't have such horrific high suicide rates in all ages. Because that is not people being soft on themselves. So I think, that we don't know is the honest answer. And the only way we're ever going to know is to ask more questions, is to be passionately curious with ourselves and with others. So when people say something, instead of immediately leaping to our judgment, which we do because that's the way our brains are wired, to go, I agree, I disagree, go, oh, that's interesting. I've not thought of it like that before. Could you explain it to me a little bit more about how you came to that conclusion? You may still end up not agreeing, that's fine, but you've learned something, which is the process that they went on. Without asking those questions, not only do you not learn anything new, but you make an assumption of what they've done to come up with the outcome. And that's what you're basing it on, is your assumption of what they did to get there, versus they may have actually gone through a process you still have a different answer at the end. But equally, be passionately curious with yourself. So I've tried really hard in the last 3 or 4 years when I find myself like going, well, I don't agree with that, or I do agree with that, or whatever, is going, okay, that's interesting. Kim, why are you so adamant that that's right or wrong? What thinking has gone behind you being so certain? And it's amazing how that opens up a new dialogue internally as well. You to go, actually, maybe what I've done is I've gone somewhere in the back of my head, there was something that happened similar to that. And now I've merged the two and I've made them one. I've decided that that's going to be my perception of the world moving forward. So, you know, I always have a word for the year. My word is curiosity. How can I be more curious? Because that doesn't mean to say that I have to change my opinion, but it does mean I may learn some new things along the way that may change some of my opinions or may provide colour that I didn't have without that curiosity.
Very interesting. Thanks, Kim. What do you think, Lisa?
I definitely agree with a lot of that, and that whole reframing thing is really big with me. And funny you should mention the analogy about the cars earlier. I got a Vauxhall Corsa not long ago and I didn't see a Corsa anywhere. Now they're just absolutely everywhere. And I think you're so right. Your brain does filter all that stuff, you know, out. And having that sort of, that thing of being able to go, that's important, that's not important to someone. But it is amazing what comes to the forefront whenever you've got something new like that.
It's so true, isn't it? And it's I guess for me, I always look at those things because they're tangible and we can see them, but it's like, but that's just the way the brain works. So if it can do it for these tangible things, it does it for the intangible things. And that's where you've got to take that leap of faith. You've got to take that leap of faith that belief is the driver, and the only thing greater than doubt is greater than doubt and fear is hope. And if we can just look at, you know, and I've seen this for years in organizations globally, we set goals in the negative. We all do, which is about what we don't want. We set the goal about what we don't want. So whether you guys have ever worked for an organization where they have minimum standards, and you're like, right, let's just pause on that for a moment. So I work all day. I do everything you asked me to do. And usually they're pretty tough, these minimum standards. So did everything you possibly asked me to do. And I get home and I say to my little girl, hey, Scully Bear, today mummy was absolutely minimum. Well, doesn't feel too great, does it? I spent all these hours away from you and I was absolutely minimum. Well, no Easter egg for me. But if you took the exact same standards and called them standards of excellence, same day, same result, but I now get to come home and go, hey, Scully Bear, today mummy was excellent. Which one is going to have the best impact on my psyche, on how I feel about myself, on how I feel about the organization that I'm working for? And we do it in our own goal setting. We don't focus on what we do want. We focus on what we don't want. I don't want to be overweight. What do I want? Focus on those parts. I don't want to I don't want to have to do a job I don't enjoy. Okay. And I did this once. One of my biggest, in fact, it was my biggest career disaster ever. And it was a massive learning for me, is I so didn't enjoy the job that I was in, but I hadn't really worked that fully through. And I went and took a job that I convinced myself was the job I wanted, dream job. I upped sticks and relocated. I bought a house. I mean, go big or go home. I knew nobody in the area. And I started this job. I was there for 3 months, 2 of which were my notice period, because I hated every minute of it. And I realized that instead of running towards the job I wanted, I'd ran away from the job I didn't want. And that for me was a massive learning, which is actually we've got to get really crystal clear on what we want, not on what we don't want. So, you know, another thing that I would recommend to people is look at the list of things you're telling yourself. And if any of them are things that you don't want, ask yourself the next question. Okay, I don't want that. What do I want? What would good look like? What is important to me? And focus on that list of things instead of the things that you don't want. So for everything that is a negative, something that you don't enjoy, you don't want to be true of yourself, ask yourself what you do want to be true, and use that as your goal and objective. And you'll be amazed at how quickly the world changes for you.
That's really, really super advice. So is there anything else you want to leave the audience with if they're suffering from lack of confidence in this respect, in imposter syndrome, and they're sort of, you know, that maybe they're doing a job, they've been doing it for a while, you know, is there any one line or two that you might want to give them?
I think there's a couple of things. I think the first is go and seek other people's opinion. So when you're suffering from imposter syndrome, certainly when I was, you're not going to tell anybody. Your biggest fear is that you're going to be found out. So the minute you tell somebody, you're definitely going to be found out because you've just told them. And so you tend not to tell anybody that that's what you're facing, that's how you feel. And you don't have to. You don't have to go around and go, I'm just going to tell everybody now I have imposter syndrome. But what you could do, and this is one I did many years ago, was I was asked to go and talk to friends, family, colleagues, people that I trusted and respected, to say, it's part of my development and I'd really love some feedback. If you could tell me the 2 or 3 things that you see as my strengths and the 2 or 3 things where I get in my own way. And you will be, I promise, amazed at the response. But when I did it, the almost unanimous response, irrelevant if it was colleagues or friends, was, you're brave and fearless. And I was like, brave and fearless? I live in fear every single day. Every day, fear that I'm going to get found out, fear that, you know, I shouldn't be here really, that I'm just a hairdresser and that someone's at some point going to work that out and kind of pack me off to where I'm supposed to be. So I was like, you're going to have to explain it to me because I genuinely don't understand. And it's probably worth noting at this point that I'm living in my 36th house since I left home at 21. So I've moved a lot, usually for work. But yeah, they all came back and said, you will literally up sticks and move somewhere where you know nobody for a job you're not even convinced you can do. And I was like, right. And they went, that's brave and fearless. And I was like, it's interesting. I thought it was flighty and a little bit stupid. So when I thought to myself, what did I think people thought of me? I thought they thought I was flighty and a little bit stupid. What they actually thought of me was I was brave and fearless. And I remember thinking, I wonder how different my life would be if I lived by their labels instead of my own. So I would recommend go and do that exercise, go and ask a few people and then borrow their belief. Borrow their belief. And the next time you tell yourself, yours won't be flighty and stupid, mine was. Next time I find myself going, I'm flighty and a little bit stupid, going, but what if I were brave? If I were brave and fearless, how would I view this? And again, it's a great way of just reframing that thinking and using that resource. And I think the other one is to get yourself a Thrive Hive. No one can do this on their own all of the time. So we need to have people around us that can help us out, that can be a sounding board, that can, for me personally, I need the person that is going to give me tough love. The one that's going to tell me to just get over myself and get on with it. But I also need the person that's going to sugar the pill and like, give me a cup of tea first before they're mean to me on some days. So I've got, 4 or 5 people in my Thrive Hive that are very different, but give me that wider perspective to allow me to see things from a more 360 view at those times where I'm stuck in my own head. Because when we're in our own head, it sounds really plausible. But many of you may have had those moments where the minute you say it out loud, you're like, you're all right, I've got this. I've just heard for myself how ridiculous that is, even though I've been having that debate in my head for a few weeks, and that felt totally plausible because I've now voiced it and I'm hearing it and I can see the expression on your face. I can see how that's landed. I hear it differently from myself. So I think you get a couple of those. And the third thing that I highly recommend that people get is a good friend of mine calls it the Big Me Up book. So you get a little notebook that you can carry everywhere, or you write it in notes in your phone, whatever is your style. And every time somebody compliments you on something that says, oh, you're really organized, you're great at this, that was really insightful, doesn't matter what it is, you write it down. And so in those moments of doubt, when you're telling yourself that you're hopeless, you can't do anything, you go back to the book, or you go back to the note that you've got that you keep building on and go, do you know what? I probably can do this, because look at all of the evidence that says that I've got this. And remind myself that I have survived 100% of the shots life's taken at me. So that's a pretty good batting average. And do that final step. For me, the biggest question that I ask, and that's because my little girl is my North Star. If this was Scarlett, what advice would I give her? And then I make myself take the advice. So swap out Scarlett for the person most important in your life. And next time you're talking to yourself, ask yourself, are these the words I would use if I were explaining this to that person? And if not, change the words.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Kim, and thank you so much, Lisa. Did you want to add anything to that, or are you got to jump off into a new?
I
stream,
do.
right?
Yes, I'm jumping off into the next stream, which will be at 4 o'clock. So I'll have to disappear off and leave you to it.
Well, thank you, Lisa. It's always a joy to chat to you.
And thanks so much, Kim, and thanks to everyone for listening. If you want to support us on our mission to help people with their syndrome, you can do that at www.iisad.org/lunch. Thank you very much.